It's always a good day when you can blow some Christian nationalist men out of the water. I just love doing that. I do. And I'm a Christian conservative my whole life. So, yeah, love blowing the Charlie Kirks out of the water. Not that I'll get seen, but someday, people will understand. But you want some biblical mind blows? Here's some biblical mind blows. Mary Magdalene and John, the disciple, they were the only ones, besides, of course, Jesus' mother. But, I mean, John and Mary were like two of the first. I think they were the first. Mary and then John, that Jesus picked when he first started. I'm not saying when he picked the 12. I explained this before. The reason Jesus, he would have picked Mary but couldn't, is because back in that day, women couldn't even be witnesses in court. It's a key word here, witness. Let me mind blow with that. So, but John, okay, and Mary Magdalene were the only two that were the first that Jesus went to that stayed through the whole crucifixion. That's really important because, well, both Mary and John didn't die martyrs. They died of old age. And this is the same John that went on to write the book of Revelation. I wonder why that could be. Well, could it have had anything to do with the fact that since they stayed and they were witnesses, although, again, Mary wouldn't have been seen as a legit witness, but she was, and she was the witness to go tell the others that he resurrected. But as far as the crucifixion, the only witness that would have been seen credible was John. He was the most loved of all the disciples, actually. And then he didn't die a martyr. He didn't die the way all the others did. But he stayed for the whole thing. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is from Passion of the Christ. Obviously, this is Jesus after just being arrested. So the crucifixion, it was a big bloody mess, okay? And the way they like to portray it is like this, which is ridiculous. They just like to put it in this pretty thing, and yeah, no, but it wasn't. It was an ugly, big, old bloody mess. And the cross was way higher than that. Probably the closest that came to doing a good job is Mel Gibson, obviously, okay? Really showing what a horrible, horrible thing it is. The thing that's important here is, even after, so by the time, before they even nailed him to the cross, he was just from head to toe a bloody mess everywhere. They believe, too, that he was bleeding even when you get scared enough, like you're anxious enough, your pores can bleed. Yeah, that's in, I think that's Strobel's book. He was a former Chicago Tribune columnist or something, and then he went on to try to disprove the Bible or disprove the crucifixion. It's the case for Christ. And Strobel said, I think it was in his book that I had read, how the pores can, if somebody gets nervous enough, their pores open and blood will come out of them. So the blood was coming from every orifice with Jesus, not just because they put a thorn of, and not just, when they say crown of thorns, no, they were like nails that they dug into his head. Okay, so there's that, because, he was also being beaten and all of that because of, he's the king of the Jews, right? So he was bloody head to toe, but then they put this image up, and the cross was way higher. So then after Jesus was dead, they speared him to make sure he was dead. Just think of the blood coming out there. So it would be more like this. So even though I can't find a good picture, is like just this is likely where John and Mary were at. They were at the foot of the cross. The cross would have been higher than this. So blood would have been, I'm not saying it would have been all over them, but they would have had blood on them. The blood of protection, maybe. Could look at it, because both of them died old ages. Am I saying that the others died those horrible deaths because they weren't there? Well, I mean, there's no, I'm not. They were just as important, but they didn't have enough faith or strength to stick with Jesus and witness the entire thing. Okay, and again, before it even happened, Jesus said, "If this was my kingdom, my people would have stood up for me." So it would have been more like that. I know it's a little hard to see, but people would have, if you're at the foot of the cross like that, and Mary was, praying, Mary Magdalene, near the cross, as close, they would have had, especially after they speared him. But even before that, they would have, because he just was bleeding everywhere. The blood of Christ. They literally had the blood of Christ on them. They were true witnesses. But of course, Mary, being a woman in this world, would not have been seen as legit, even though she was. But John, most especially, it's why, he did suffer. He did, but he was always saved. It's so interesting, John. The other thing that's interesting about John's gospel is that he highlights what a unique and important role that Mary played, because she was the first to have seen the risen Jesus. And that's who Jesus sent her out to tell them. John mentions that, but again, you have to see it look at it from John's. John actually was out of all the disciples, was the only one that stayed through the whole thing. According to early Christian tradition, after surviving an attempt on his own life, thrown into boiling oil and emerging unharmed, John was exiled to the island Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. After his exile, he returned to Ephesus and died of an old age around AD 100. And they believe Mary died at like 50 AD in France. As it says, John was the disciple whom Jesus loved, was one of the first disciples called by Jesus, and became part of his inner circle throughout Jesus' public ministry. Mary Magdalene became an early follower after Jesus healed her of 7 demons at the beginning of his ministry, both at the beginning of his ministry. So what I'm trying to say is it's really important, because without at least John, because yeah, it was important that Mary was there, but of course in a world where the men are never realizing that God was always wanting women to be back at equal status with men, because that's what he wanted originally in the garden, and yet nobody was ever getting it. He couldn't, making her one of the 12 would have done no good, and because nobody would have seen her, because she couldn't even be a witness in court. But John, being the only one that saw the whole crucifixion, he's the one that only writes about it. He's the only one that can. Because it's not like when Jesus resurrected, he came back and he said, yeah, they did this to me, they did that to me. No, he needed people there to say this all happened. Otherwise, how do you account for the resurrection? Well, he had Jesus there, he had Mary there to account that, no, he resurrected, and then she went and told the others, and then Jesus came to them, so they wrote about it. But who was the only one, that would have been, besides Mary Magdalene, that saw him actually die? John. And yet John never had to be a martyr. He never was martyred. Am I saying that makes the other disciples less than? No, but it means he stood by. He was the witness. Mary Magdalene and John were the 2 witnesses that were with Jesus from the beginning all the way to the end. But Mary Magdalene would have seen as not credible, because none of the men throughout history have been getting this idea that God did not want women to be seen as less than, and as long as the world continues to treat women as they're less than, then it shows God that what you reflect to him is that you want to stay in your sinful world, because you do not want to elevate your mind into being becoming like, you don't want to walk with the Spirit of God, which then your mind should be the Spirit of God, if that makes sense. So literally the blood being on them, because they were able to witness it, is why they didn't end up going on to suffer the horrible deaths the others did. Yeah. Go tell all the Christian nationalist men that, please. Because, of course, in this world, I'm a woman. I'm just not seen as someone that understands the word, and I'm supposed to be quiet and submissive.